Hey everyone, we are in week 11. Hope everyone is doing okay during this quarantine. I hope that you're able to get some time with family, maybe that you don't usually see or haven't been around. I know a lot of you are home or um, back with parents or family, so I'm just hoping that you can use this time to connect, even though it is a little chaotic. I know some of you are out there working, so definitely stay safe and be careful. And please let me know, as the weeks continue, how you're doing. Feel free to share any thoughts about how all this is going for you, because we're definitely in a unique time. There's actually a lot of correlation this week to what we're going to be talking about. The chapter this week is chapter 12, which is social psychology. So I'm thinking this is actually really great timing because a lot of what you're seeing happening out in the world today and in our immediate culture is so relevant to the material that we're going to be discussing in this chapter. So social psychology is all about social norms and behaviors within the social context that we live. So the social learning perspective that we've talked about earlier in the semester is sort of predominant here in understanding human behavior and how other people and groups can influence us in the way that we act in our decision making. So I'm hoping that as you're going through the um, chapter this week that you might be able to reflect on how a lot of this applies to what's going on around us. So the first thing you're going to want to do is check over this to-do list. And again, I try to put it in the order that I really think is most beneficial for you to work on these things. I really want you guys first looking over the objectives, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and then going straight to the chapter. So reading that chapter, listening to the audio of the chapter is really good. And then once you've done that, you can go ahead and read your Hawk reading, which is just a carve out. So this week the reading is called Obey at Any Cost, and it's based on the original Milgram study of obedience that is talked about also in chapter 12. So it's just a little carve out of that where you're getting a little more information about the original study, how it was conducted, what they found. And that's really going to be important to read chapter 12 first and then read Hawk. And then once you've done that, you're going to go ahead and watch the videos this week. There's a lot of videos this week. I'm just going to give you a heads up, but most of them are under 6 minutes. So there's a lot of short little clips about different concepts to help illustrate some of the material a little bit better. There are 3 longer videos. One is the Milgram study, but it's a remake. So it's the Milgram study revised and done in 2007. And so I'd love you to have a good understanding of that original study before you try to watch the revised one. Otherwise, it's not going to make a lot of sense. So go ahead and make sure you've done those readings first. So the longer video is that Milgram video. Then we have the Stanford Prison Study, which is all about groups and role playing and how that can affect behavior, especially in the context of power. So that's a little bit of a longer one. And then I believe the third longer video is the Jane Elliott video on prejudice and discrimination and how it's learned. So she did the brown-eyed, blue-eyed study. And I have the original footage of that study here in your videos for the week. So those are the 3 longer ones. All the rest are very short clips. So be sure to watch all of those. Once you've done the reading and once you've watched the videos, then you can go ahead and start your discussion. Okay. And I really want to reiterate that when you're doing your discussion, you want to be integrating all those sources. So the chapter, the Hawk reading, and videos, if and when they're applicable to what you're bringing up or what you're talking about. remember that you can be integrating those not only into your main response, but also when you're replying to other people. You can go ahead and tie that stuff in, bring it up if someone else didn't and it applies. That's a great opportunity to mention that and tie that in. Once you've done that, there's a quiz this week covering the chapter 12. And then I've actually also given an extra credit opportunity all the way at the bottom. So we'll talk about that in a sec. Here are your learning objectives for chapter 12. And you can go ahead and look these over before you look over the lecture slides. Remember, the lecture slides are interactive, so when you click on this, it's going to open the PowerPoint. You want to watch that PowerPoint in presentation mode so that you can work through each slide and move through each slide as if it were a presentation. And in doing so, you're going to be able to click on videos that are in that lecture and have a little more access to some of that interactive information that you wouldn't if you were just viewing it as an outline. Okay. So for this chapter, it's kind of like three main categories. We're going to be looking at how people influence us and we influence others. Okay. So when we talk about influence or social influence, we're referring to compliance, obedience, which you're going to see a lot of in the videos that we're talking about, as well as conformity. Okay, so what happens when we're asked to obey by an authority figure, what holds power over us, what makes it more likely that we will obey, what factors need to be present for that to occur. And that's all given a direct request. How would we obey? And then there is compliance, when we are asked to do something, but maybe not in necessarily a direct way. We're not given an order, we're not given a command. We are just compelled to act in a way, maybe because we want to please others, or we want to be accepted by others, or we know the ramifications if we don't. So there's different techniques that can be used to gain compliance. A lot of times this is used in marketing and advertising. People want you to comply with, a particular viewpoint that they have or a product that they're selling. They want you to buy. So it has to do with buying behavior. And the book is going to talk about different specific techniques that are used to gain compliance. If I want you to do something, what would make it more likely that you would do what I want? Are there tactics I can be using that would bring about compliance? And so those are the ones I want you to get familiar with. And then just, how is our behavior affected by the presence of others? We don't act the same when we're around others than when we're by ourselves. And there's the conformity element. And we're going to be looking at Ash's conformity studies and how people's opinions affect us, and how our need to fit in, our need to conform affects us. We abide by social norms mostly in our society, and that's a good thing most of the time. Sometimes it's not. And so you'll look at situations where, that's good and not so good. So that's kind of like the first third of the chapter, and then it's going to move into attitudes. What forms an attitude? What are the different components of an attitude? How can our attitudes be changed? How do they affect our behavior? So if we believe one thing, how does that affect our behavior? If we're behaving in a certain way, can we predict an attitude so you can flip it? So we're going to look at some of the research on attitude as well as impression formation. So how do we determine our opinions about other people, our attitudes about other people? What types of information do we consider when we're trying to understand others? That is sort of the middle part of the text. And then you're going to get into a little bit on prejudice and discrimination. To be honest, I feel like the chapter doesn't give it enough weight. So I've included a few videos to kind of amp this up a little bit. talks very briefly about prejudice and discrimination, and I just feel like it wasn't enough. So here's where watching those videos is really going to come in handy. Then it gets into the latter third of the chapter, which is interpersonal attraction, love, relationships, and then helping behavior, altruism, pro-social behavior, how and why do we help others, when do we not help, and how does group processes affect this. So here's where we're talking about group conformity, group identity, group think. So those are some of the concepts you're going to come across as you're learning that section. So that's sort of the outline. Your lecture slides, your discussion, as I said this week, deals with the original Milgram study, kind of getting you to think beyond it. What are the situational and dispositional factors that contribute to a person's tendency to obey versus not obey? Like, what makes it more likely that someone will obey versus not? You're going to see in the video who did and who didn't, what those percentages look like. You're going to want to know why, what factors were around that. And then how would people react today in a similar study? And there's where the Milgram remake, right here, the modern day Milgram study, is going to come in handy for understanding how people, has it changed? You know, Milgram did those original studies in the 50s. What's changed since? So you want to be looking for pointing some of that out. Each of these videos, I give you points to consider. These are not questions you're having to answer and turn in. It's just look these over before you start the video so you kind of have an idea of the key things I want you looking for. Okay, here's the Jane Elliott study on prejudice and racism. Here's the IAT video, which is looking at the way people view race and ethnicity. IAT is the implicit association test, so it's tapping into an implicit prejudice that we can carry with us and not be aware of. Implicit is below our level of consciousness, so it's influencing how we act and think, but we're not necessarily aware of that. That video talks about the research behind this and how it's used. It's really cool, interesting how they do it, so I think you'll like that one. Here's Ash's conformity study, a quick Khan Academy video on conformity and groupthink, another quick video on bystander intervention, a modern day kind of what would you do scenario with bystander intervention, another Khan Academy on social facilitation and social loafing. This is how others can affect our performance in a good way and in a bad way. And then we have the Stanford Prison Study, which is the role of groups and power and de-individuation. So check that out. All of these videos, I want to say you should be watching in Chrome or Firefox as your browser. Don't use Safari. You won't be able to open some of them in Safari. So make sure you're always doing that. I would recommend that regardless. Anytime you're using Play-Doh, use Chrome because it has a lot of issues with Safari. These are all crash course videos. We've been doing these all semester, so they're all little blurbs on each of these topics: aggression and altruism, social influence, social thinking, prejudice and discrimination. So I would actually recommend watching these first because they're each short and they give a nice overview of that subfield of social psych. And then I would go dive into some of the other videos. Here is your quiz. And here is the extra credit. It's on the movie Crash, so it's a really good, awesome movie. If you have some extra time and you're wanting something to do, watch the movie, and then you're just going to answer these questions here, which it's cutting off my screen, but when you go into Play-Doh, you'll see it. You're going to answer these questions and submit your assignment here by clicking on this and then just answering these questions. So have these next to you as you're watching the movie. You're going to kind of want to take notes as you're watching the movie, just on things you see happen, examples here and there of what the characters are doing. And that's it. That's the extra credit assignment. I think you'll get a lot out of it. I show this to my social psych class when we're covering prejudice and discrimination, and it's always great. Students love it. So that's it. That's your week in view. again, please let me know, if you're having any needs. All right.